The general assessment is that this may be a man who is flawed, his character may be flawed, but that, you know, look at his record, look at his administration, it's kind of the bad man, good president thesis. But you say that the public and private face of Bill Clinton are one and the same.
Very much so. And both of them very reptilian. I'll give you an example. I said war criminal. It might sound demagogic to say that, but I mean, I think it's now been proved, and I have a chapter on it in my book that has not been rebutted. I've tried it out in Washington a lot, that says, quite simply, that 3 times last year he used cruise missiles for his own personal promiscuous reasons. He actually used American power, deadly force, for reasons of caprice. The stuff that Stanley Kubrick was warning us all about, and liberals knew how to laugh about when it was Ronald Reagan, really came true. The specific case that I spend most time on is the rocketing of the pharmaceutical factory in Khartoum the day Monica Lewinsky went back to the grand jury, which was very particularly a presidential decision. It was taken without reference to the Joint Chiefs or the CIA, and hit the wrong target, or in other words, it misidentified the target as a nerve gas factory.
Now, you say
and the reason why they made all these mistakes, and the administration's had now to admit that everything it claimed about the plant was wrong, is that they were in, or rather, Mr. Clinton was in a tremendous hurry, and there's only one reason why he would have been.
But you say in the book that Clintonism poisons everything it touches. I mean, the assumption is almost that this man is evil, that he is qualitatively and quantitatively different than the other politicians we may generally hold in low regard.
No, I think he is, even by the most relaxed standard, an unusually hollow and empty and cold individual, and completely ruthless. I remember talking about him with Norman Mailer quite early on in the administration. Mailer being one of those, by the way, who isn't part of the liberal consensus about our bill. Mailer's wife is from Arkansas, for example, and indeed used to know Clinton when she was younger. Mailer's watched him quite a bit and said that what struck him, and Mailer's also written a lot about the presidency and also the presidential libido ever since Kennedy. He's been a clever watcher of that kind of thing. So the interesting thing about Clinton is the following. There's nothing you can say that he would not do. That doesn't sound like a lot to say. If you say of a friend, I wouldn't put anything past him, you know, it isn't a huge indictment, but actually of most people you know, you would in fact be able to say, no, he wouldn't quite do this.
Right.
Actually, he really wouldn't do that. You can't say that about Clinton. I don't think there's anything you could possibly put past him.
Now, you've made the point that the liberal intelligentsia of America, which you normally can count on for some modicum of criticism against an incumbent president, especially an incumbent president who, you know, has done things on welfare reform and military activity, have been silenced and shamed, I think is your point. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the left or liberals in America have not been more vocal in their criticism of Clinton?
Well, it's partly because of a theory and a practice that I've attacked elsewhere, and implicitly attack again in this book, which is the theory of the lesser evil. In other words, right up front, a lot of people have given away their right to be critical, to be independent, or to be ethical. And of course, the consequences of that are a lot of slack is cut for crooks or very unscrupulous people like Clinton. I mean, for example, probably the thing that has the largest consensus behind it morally in the United States is that the campaign finance system is rotten to the core. Everybody knows that the way in which campaigns are financed and donations are solicited is absolutely unpardonable. But by any standard, including the standard of Richard Nixon, Mr. Clinton has taken the country to the cleaners. He's absolutely sold his party and high offices of state to foreign despots, to shady offshore corporations and so on, for large sums of illegal money. He's destroyed the distinction between hard and soft money, which is fairly hypocritical to begin with. He's set a completely new standard for political corruption. Now, he's also attracted the least criticism from the usual suspects for doing so. Now, there's clearly something dysfunctional about that.
Well, it's not even silence. I mean, I've watched politics and observed politics long enough to know that when a politician normally gets involved in a scandal, the natural constituency runs for the hills. Yet we're seeing, you know, Jesse Jackson praying with Hillary and Bill, Gloria Steinem writing editorial defenses, Barbara Streisand doing fundraising dinners. What's with these people?
Arthur Schlesinger coming forward to say that all gentlemen must lie about sex. How he would know about either gentleman or sex, I have no idea. Yeah, all of that. And then when you argue against it, you say, well, let's just take the campaign finance thing and the tremendous sellout to China, where it looks very likely now as if the sinews of proliferation were franchised to the Chinese in return for dubious money. So that's corruption of American politics at one end and the creation of a very unstable and dangerous superpower at the other. I make this case, say, in New York at some dinner party, and someone will look at me, I won't give a name, but someone, say, who might well be writing for the New York Review of Books, and will say, well, what do you want, Dan Quayle as president? And I say, look, is that really your argument? Is that the whole story? And they will, very often that's all it was, not even an argument. I mean, I do have a degree which involves passing a paper or two in formal logic. I don't need it for this purpose. That's not even an argument. It's not really even a very good observation. What it suggested to me, that people would lower their standards for reasoning in that way, was that there was something that would be might vulgarly be called denial at work, that they simply wouldn't face that they had twice voted for.
Is that because...
And found charming, I might add.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, it's almost at a non-logical, emotional level. Is that because they kind of find Clinton more hip, more like them than, you know, a Dan Quayle? Is that all we're dealing with here?
There is an element of that, yes. With Dan Quayle, they already know they don't like it. This is the Midwest. It's the Christian right, blah, blah, blah.
It's not someone you'd want to have over for
Whereas
dinner.
Clinton was at least able, he's a Rhodes Scholar. He's got an intelligent wife. She's not fantastically intelligent, but by First Lady standards, she's pretty smart. He knows how to make nice. Indeed, one of the first things I found repellent and suspicious about Clinton was the fact that everyone found him charming. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't pick my friends among those who were liked by everybody.
Well, on that, I mean...
It's not a good sign if you can charm everyone. It means you don't care about anyone in particular.
No, but your critics have said that you're obsessed with Clinton, and the criticism is so over the top that even when they agree with the substance, that, you know, they just are finding, you know, comfort or prepared to support the other guy because the criticism is, is just so vicious. I mean, what's your response to those people?
Well, I think you have to get their attention, and I thought
that you have.
Probably, in order to do that, one had to, without exaggerating, actually hold up the mirror and say, "This is what you're missing. You're missing it because it's in front of your nose." Now, I've done maybe 4 or 5 columns and several broadcasts on the Sudanese matter, saying, "Look, is it or is it not true that Clinton used cruise missiles to blow up the medical resources of a poor country to save his own fat face?" If I hadn't been saying that, nobody would have been saying it. I mean, no one else wrote about it. I kept on and on about it. And now the administration's had to admit that, well, we don't have an alternative explanation for that any longer. We give up all our claims. Well, I'm glad I did that, but I had to be out there, looking, no doubt, like a one-note Johnny. But I said, I'm going on strike about this. Well, I mean, I'm not stopping till this is either admitted or protested against, or both. And I wouldn't take a word of it back. In fact, I'm only ashamed of having done so little.
Now, you claim much worse than the sexual dalliances that Clinton has been accused of, that there has been a publicly financed, orchestrated campaign to, I think in your words, discredit, smear, or threaten women who have dared to expose him for what he really is.
That's right.
Tell us about what some of the most disturbing examples of that are for you.
Well, I think probably the most disturbing is the stories that we heard about the harassment of Kathleen Willey after she made her allegation of the advance in the Oval Office itself. Various unpleasant things happened to her. Her car was done in. It seems one of her pets was killed, and while she was out jogging, she was approached by a stranger who knew about the pet and knew about the car, and also knew her children's names, and gave her effectively a warning. A frightener was hired by somebody. Now, there is a gentleman whose name perhaps I won't mention. It isn't a well-known name anyway, except to Washington insiders. Very unpleasant political tycoon, fundraiser, black bag man, who is currently pleading the Fifth Amendment to the question: Did the president ask you to hire a frightener? Right? I'd want to do better than plead the Fifth if I was accused of doing that kind of thing.
You would think.
Dick Morris, who was for a while, as well as Clinton's main strategist and financier, or rather spender of the money, as well as that was for a while Clinton's only male friend, has since said that there was a department maintained by the Clintons, run by a woman called Betsy Wright, partly paid for with public funds, which hired private detectives to go and inquire into the past of inconvenient females, tell them what might happen to them if they were so indiscreet as to tell the truth about their relationship with the president. So we have innumerable women describing what that's been like for them. And then we had the very plain attempt, I thought, to obstruct justice by smearing Monica Lewinsky as a blackmailer and a stalker. Now, we know the president's the author of that story because his subordinate, Mr. Blumenthal, testified that to the grand jury. We know that came from Clinton. We know how it got into the press. Clinton's people put it there. It wasn't just a smear and a defamation, it was a threat. It was telling her what would happen to her if she didn't stay perjured. And at that point, they didn't know she had any evidence to the contrary.
I want to get into that, needless to say, but on the more substantive issues and beyond sleaze, I mean, you talk about a policy of triangulation, particular architect Dick Morris in this. Explain what that is for our audience. It's a very interesting concept.
He was hired on by Clinton, in particular at the instigation of the First Lady, as the sort of guy they needed in a tight corner. He came up with a cheap theory with a fancy-sounding name. The cheap theory is understandable by anyone who can grasp the principle of three-card Monte, I think. But it's called triangulation. It consists of this. You comb through the Republican Party's program, and you steal all the best bits of it that you can.
The supportable ends.
Yes. And you hope that you'll bring their donors along with the programs. You'll get the money that comes with, which you can easily do. And then you road test it through opinion polls to see at which point to adopt which policy and so on. It's quite carefully calibrated. Now, that's an old story. Stealing the opponent's clothes is one thing, and moving to the center, as it's sometimes called, middle ground is another. But this is to really, so to speak, to make it not a tactic, but the whole strategy. It's the thing itself. The Ding an sich, as Hegel would have said. The third bit, which is, in a way, should be the hardest, but under Clinton has, to my annoyance, been the easiest, is keeping the liberals with you while you do that.
Your actual constituency, your voting constituency.
Which in the Democratic Party's traditional sense is organized labor.
Right.
Certainly the urban, most actually of black America. Quite a lot of the educated female population represented by organizations like NOW, National Organization of Women. A tutti quanti, that kind of thing.
Right, right.
That's the hard bit, because you have to get them to swallow an awful lot. But that's the bit that, in a sense, worked the best for him.
A political pro would say, well, okay, it's a good strategy.
And also, I might add another relatively new force in the United States, the gay community. For example, Mr. Clinton raised an enormous amount of money from them in '92, saying he would lift the ban on homosexuals in the armed forces.
Right.
He broke that promise within 2 days of being elected, which
Don't ask, don't tell.
Don't ask, don't tell, which was at one point going to be the title of my book. I was going to call it Ask Not, Tell Not, which I thought was bad for two reasons. One is he plainly suckered them, and the other was that he was giving in to the Joint Chiefs who were telling him what the policy should be. And
right.
It's very important in the United States that civilian control be maintained. It should be him telling them. But well, your point about politically clever,
right.
You can then turn to the gay people who've done all this for you and say, well, sorry, faggots, but where are you going to go? To the Republican Party? No.
Sure.
But there are diminishing returns to this, you see, I think. I mean, in the end, it means that politics is hollowed out at its core. It's all over. It just really is a racket.
Because there is no philosophical or moral compass that's driving.
So, yeah, call me old-fashioned if you will, but I mind about that.
Now, welfare reform also for you is a great example of triangulation, and in many respects a turning point for the Democrats.
It was probably the most ruthless of the lot, because if the Democratic Party stood for anything, it was for at least what had survived of the Roosevelt New Deal, and one of the emblematic features of that was that in the United States, a child is not held responsible for the faults of its parents.
Of course.
That if you're born into appalling poverty, you're not going to suffer to the extreme. There is a federal guaranteed minimum that can be paid, is paid to you or for you, or usually to your mother, to make sure that no matter how bad things get, there is a floor, net, that's variously described. Clinton's removed that with one stroke. Now, he used to say that he wouldn't cut people off welfare and just drop them into the bottomless statistical pool until there'd been retraining for people provided, until there was health care, various other ways to soften the blow. Everyone wants more people on welfare to be at work, of course. But faced with what he thought might be a tight election, he simply adopted the harshest bits of the Republican program, proposed a bill that was tougher than any they'd ever proposed, cut all the redeeming features out of it, and rammed it through to show that he could be a hard man.
All in the aid of keeping corporate America on side financially.
Absolutely, yes. And also, of course, of depriving the Republicans of an issue. Now, that was thought abnormally cynical, even by his own cabinet. The person argued against it most strongly, oddly enough, was corporate America's best friend in his cabinet, Robert Rubin, who is, well, maybe a more intelligent person than Clinton. He didn't think this was a necessity.
Now, switching gears entirely, I mean, you follow all these stories, but you became part of the story relatively recently when you testified in the Starr investigation, and some people say betrayed your old friend, Sidney Blumenthal, by claiming that he had told you what was the party line in the White House, that Monica Lewinsky was a stalker. I mean, give me some sense of what your motivation was there. Didn't seem in character.
The Judas kiss, you mean, from your humble servant? No, it isn't in character. That wouldn't be in character, but it wasn't a Judas kiss either. I've been telling Sidney for a long time, if you have to be involved with this guy, which I didn't think he did, don't get involved in the dirty tricks end of it. You don't have to do that.
And this clearly was a dirty trick when Blumenthal told you this.
Look, Mr. Clinton told my friend a completely false story about Monica Lewinsky that was also very defamatory of Miss Lewinsky herself. And it was intended to mislead his wife, his cabinet, the public, until there was no one left to light it. And Sidney had to get his own lawyer to go before the grand jury and talk and give this false story, and go through a lot of worry and annoyance as a result, and possible exposure, and also waste a lot of his and our time, on our dime, I might add, because we were paying for all this. And I don't think it's me who's betrayed Mr. Blumenthal. I think the friend who betrayed him there was Mr. Clinton. And all I did when asked, well, can you say of your own knowledge whether or not any of the president's people were putting about this filthy slander, I thought obliged to say yes.
But you kind of rule 101
I'd said it already.
Of journalism is, and I know you see yourself as more than simply a journalist, but is never become part of the story.
Well, it's not one of my rules.
But what was your
I wasn't there when they coined that rule.
What was your motivation? I mean, because clearly Sidney Blumenthal was a good friend of yours. I think I read somewhere you said, I was hoping I could hit the president and miss Sidney.
Well, that's what I did do. I mean, it was quite clear to me that Sidney would be in no jeopardy. He would look a fool if he denied it, and he'd look a fool having circulated the story, and he'd already had to admit he'd been lied to and made to look a fool by Clinton to begin with. I'm sorry about all that. That's not my fault. On the other hand, my only alternative would be to lie or pretend ignorance, which was another form of falsehood, and in so doing safeguard one of their lies. Well, I'm very proud of the fact that at least one Clintonian lie expired in my personal arms. I was able to put it to sleep, and I wish I'd been able to do that more often.
But you paid quite a price. I mean, your colleagues have called you Christopher Snitchens, and yeah, part of your I think strength has been you've always been able to get inside. And develop, if not a personal relationship, certainly an intimate understanding of Washington power brokers. I mean, does this hurt your access?
I, of course, minded being called a snitch, because a snitch is someone who does a plea bargain to save their own skin, right?
But clearly there was no upside for you.
No one's even accused me of anything remotely like that. As to access, a good friend of mine, my head of my department, actually, at the New School in New York, where I teach, called me and said, well done and good on you and so on, but who's going to feed you stories from now on? And I said, it was nice of you, Jim, but I've never been fed stories. That's not how I operate. I am not part of that Washington press corps that simply acts as a megaphone or a conduit for the administration. I wasn't there when that agreement on protection of sources was written either. They can use us anytime they like. I wasn't part of that agreement. But then I thought to myself, actually, that's not true. I was once fed a story, and it was by Sidney Blumenthal. But at least I regurgitated it.
You make the point in the book, and you made it over the course of this talk, that for Clinton, his foreign policy is his domestic policy, or more to the point, I guess his foreign policy is driven by his domestic political needs. What about Kosovo and the bombing of the Serbians? Is this political opportunism, or is this, for some people, a moral imperative?
It's not wag the dog, if that's what you mean. I think it's true that Clinton likes to pose as commander-in-chief because, especially now with the China scandal breaking and a number of other unwelcome developments on the home front, it's always a good thing to pose as commander-in-chief, but I think he never feels very comfortable posing like that for long, for more than a day or so. Even though he did say in Bob Woodward's book, The Choice, to his friends at one point, and they wrote it down, they were so shocked. I feel like a man out of my time. I should have been president in the Second World War. Don't you wish you had been too? But not for long. What he really would like to do this week is have a nice conference on gun-shy school children and therapy, because that's what he really likes to convene, you know, a no-risk meeting like that.
Right, right.
He also skipped a lot of the important meetings on Iraq and on Kosovo, because Kosovo's been coming for a long time, and anyone could see it. He skipped a lot of the national security meetings he was supposed to go to because he was with his own lawyers doing his own business.
Now, in fact...
Now, well...
Go on.
The outcome is the following. The harvest is the following. The Prime Minister of Italy was in Washington, I think 10 days before the bombing began. Massimo D'Alema, the new Prime Minister. Italy's the frontline state in this matter. Okay, the Adriatic is its frontier, so to speak. The Albanian refugees have for years been trying to get to Italy. Also, that's where the bases are. The planes have to leave from there.
Right.
Therefore, the Italian Prime Minister had good standing to ask the President the following question. And he told us this, D'Alema, in his own briefing. Well, Mr. President, if we do as you ask and commence bombing, and Mr. Milosevic does not alter his policy on Kosovo, but instead revenges himself on the Kosovar Albanians, what will we do then? You didn't need much prescience to ask that kind of question. He said that Clinton looked at him as if the question was occurring for the first time to him. And then looked away to where Sandy Berger, that mediocre hack, national security advisor, was sitting and said, well, Sandy, what would we do then? And after a short pause, which must have seemed to Signor D'Alema like a long one, Berger said, well, I think we just keep bombing. Now, this is barely serious at all. Then it did happen as the Italian leadership had feared. 600,000, maybe more people made totally destitute in a matter of weeks, and destabilizing the neighboring countries, and becoming a building block for a future greater Albanian movement, which I can guarantee to you will not be a pretty sight. And they say, oh, we expected that, we knew that would happen, that was all part of the plan. Clinton said so himself. But after all, if they were ready for it, as they say, and Cohen said it too, and Albright, you know, we expected this to happen. Where were the blankets at the Macedonian border? Where was the bottled water? Where were the plastic Pampers and the food parcels? They weren't ready for it at all. Well, so we better hope they're lying.
Well, just on that, I mean, that the, you know, from all quarters, I mean, NATO seems to be criticized for, you know, no clear focus, no clear strategy. I mean, is that Clinton's responsibility also, the absence of any focus here?
Yes. I should say that I'm one of those who's long wanted that it be a fight put up by NATO against Milosevic. And I think there should have been one over Bosnia. But unfortunately, the Dayton Accord, which was necessary to buy a bit of time for the Clinton administration, promoted Mr. Milosevic to senior partner. Only somewhat, I think, in the hope of getting a Nobel Prize for Mr. Holbrooke, but in general, said, you know, he's our necessary peacemaking partner, which meant that the administration has already made itself an accomplice in ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, which is something I think that's imperfectly understood. It's now made itself an accomplice of ethnic cleansing in Kosovo.
Look ahead. What is all of this that you've talked about in the Clinton administration? What does that portend for Al Gore and the Democrats going forward?
In Washington at the moment, people are finding their courage at last, and they're taking out on Al Gore what they wouldn't take out on Clinton. Mr. Gore's numbers, as they call them, are in free fall. I think he is going to pay a price for having been a poodle to Clinton. I think in some ways that's unfair, because he is not a man without integrity by any means, or without scruple. But I think it's going to be quite difficult to shoehorn him into the presidency, and certainly anyone who runs against him for the nomination will have a huge presumptive advantage simply because they'll make the race more interesting. The press will like whoever runs against him because it gives them something to write about, which Mr. Gore, generally speaking, does not. But I think also some of the undischarged revulsion and even guilt that people will feel at having let Clinton get away with it will be vented on Mr. Gore. Meanwhile, it does seem as if the fix is really in the GOP, and that there's not really going to be much of a nomination race, and that Mr. Bush is going to get it, which will mean that the Clinton period would be an 8-year hiatus of nothingness punctuated by nastiness, is my definition. Sometimes I'm thinking of updating that to nastiness punctuated by nothingness, and just an interval between two Bushes. And that will be, as people are now beginning to say, rather tediously, I find, his place in history. But I think that's already decided.